Remember that thing from, I guess it must have been from like middle school algebra? Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. And the whole idea of it was the order of operations when you're doing algebra. There's sort of like an equivalent in the personal finance space. And this is actually seriously controversial. Some people become irate if you put these things in the wrong order. And that'll probably happen based on what I'm going to do. But I think the important takeaway here is there's a general flow in terms of how to get your financial house in order. And this is something that should be taught to every 12-year-old. There's adults that don't know this or understand this. And it's part of, not the only reason, but it's part of why some people are really bad at saving money or organizing their finances. A lot of people are stuck with stagnant wages. There's a political aspect to this. There's no question about that. We're dealing with the personal finance piece here. I deal with the political stuff over on my political channel. So let's just jump right into this. I've said before, and I think that this is one where there is less disagreement, that the absolute first thing that has to happen is a $1,000 emergency fund. Okay. There is, I remember we've talked about this on the award globally famous bonus show, that something like 40% of the country would have to go into debt. And this looks like a 6. I mean, it's like my handwriting's terrible and it's so hard to write on these tablets. 40% of the country would have to go into some kind of debt for an unexpected $400 expense. So the first thing is you must have an emergency fund of $1,000. Got to work towards that. Right when we get into the next steps, it starts to get more complicated. So I'm going to put a couple of things on the same line here, okay? So we're going to call these like 2, 3, and 4 because there is disagreement as to the exact right order, okay? So you have 401k or IRA match, right? You want to take advantage of that free money from an employer if you have it, and or your 3 to 6 month expense fund. You want to have 3 to 6 months of expenses in savings. Now, that's not 3 to 6 months of income. It's just expenses. And hopefully expenses are less than income. And or what we would call your high percentage debt, which is typically credit cards. All right. Now, why is this controversial? It's controversial because different people have different perspectives on this. So let's talk through each one of these. You've got your $1,000 emergency fund. You now, if you have credit cards, for example, are paying sometimes 25% on that debt. So once you've got that fund, you need to pay that down as quickly as possible. Why? Well, an interest rate that you pay, saving on that is almost like earning that amount of interest. So in other words, if I can avoid a 25% interest rate, it's sort of like if I had money working for me at 25% interest. It's not literally the same, but that's the idea. So if you can avoid a 25% interest rate on credit cards, that should be a very high priority. Makes a lot of sense. Well, what about the IRA or 401k match? There is what we might call free money here. If your employer matches up to 3% of your salary, 1-to-1 in a 401k, the only way you get that 3% of free money is by putting in your own 3%. So that's 100, in a sense, it's a 100% interest. For every dollar you put in, you're getting $1 out of that. So that would be a reason that you would, as quickly as possible, want to take advantage of the 401k match. Well, what about the high interest debt? 24%. Well, but this is 100%. Right, but this money you don't get access to until retirement. Well, so this is exactly where some of the controversy comes in. And it really depends on your situation. Is it a modest amount of debt? Can you pay off some of the debt while still taking advantage of the matching? And then there's the 3 to 6 months of expenses. A lot of people don't have paid vacation and or don't have a disability policy. And if you were unable to work, now we're beyond the emergency fund. If you were unable to work for a period of time, having these 3 to 6 months of expenses would be really, really important. Okay. So 2, 3, 4 is a sort of, it depends on your particular situation. Then we get to number 5. And again, I'm going to kind of group these in a particular way. Here is where you want to be taking advantage of maxing out, make sure this is clear, maxing out retirement type accounts that are limited. Okay. So for example, could be a Roth IRA, could be a traditional IRA. If you are self-employed, it could be your SEP IRA, could be what's called an individual 401k, where you're self-employed, so there's really no matching, but there's a limit that you can do. Now, not every single one of these is tax deductible. There are some retirement accounts where the contributions are tax deductible. You pay the taxes as you use the money. There's also the opposite, where your contributions are not tax deductible, but the money grows, and then when you sell the asset, you don't pay tax then. The point is, with all of these, there are limits to how much you can contribute per year. And so at this point in time, it will often be a good idea to go there. Now, there's also, and I think that this is pretty clearly below it in my view, but some people might kind of group these together. There is the maxing out your regular 401k, or if you're in education, it would be like a 403b. But wait a second, didn't we already talk about that here? Here in steps 2, 3, 4, we're talking about contributing what you need to get the maximum match, With a lot of these accounts, you can contribute well beyond the match. Okay, so that's why initially the point is, let me get all the free money from my employer. And then at a later point, you might say, well, now I want to really max out with what I can do. Okay. Then you have other types of accounts that can be important. 529 account. If you have a kid, that's an educational account. There are health savings accounts, which allow you to put pre-tax money that can be used for health expenses. There's other tax advantaged accounts that you can look at. And then 8, typically, we would have something like lower rate debt. And this is going to be controversial. I'm going to put student loan and I'm going to put mortgage. Now, both of these things are very, very controversial. Student loan debt varies, and it can be from, nothing accrues all the way up to, I don't even know what the top end is on student loans right now, honestly, if they're private loans. So depending on what that rate is, student loan might actually be considered a high interest debt, and you would consider it differently. The counter would be, what if there's some student loan debt forgiveness, as Joe Biden is trying to do right now around the recording of this video? So the inclusion of student loan here is controversial. Mortgage is also controversial. Some people have mortgage rates like 2.5%. And if your mortgage rate is only 2.5%, you also get some tax deductibility subject to your SALT limit. It starts to get complicated, really depends on your situation. You might believe that you're actually better off, and that's why we will also group these. This would be called a general investment account. And to make that clear, that is taxable, okay? This would just be like, I just have mutual funds. They're not in a 401k. They're not in a Roth. They're not in a retirement account. It's just general investment. One could argue that if historically the market returns 7%, why would you take this money and instead put it in to save only 2.5%? And also, if you pay off your mortgage early, you lose the tax deductibility. Now, again, with a $10,000 SALT limit, we're getting into more details here. The calculation is more complicated than this, but there is an argument to be made there. And listen, I'm in this situation. I have a mortgage that I believe is 2875, and I am not aggressively paying that off. I really don't get the tax benefit because I'm already hitting that 10K minimum anyway, but I would much rather accumulate stocks and bonds, earn the dividends from just time in the market, and keep paying that 2.875% on my mortgage. So this is a basic framework You can honestly argue with every aspect of this. And there will be financial advisors who say, no, 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 529 and HSA, that should be at the bottom. That should be later. Or no, 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 you never pay off the mortgage early. Well, there's the emotional component, the psychological component. Mortgage rates, we're getting around 6% now. So I think my interest in paying off a mortgage early would be different at 6% than at 2.5. So one of the things that I think is important not to do is to say that there is always an exact right order that applies to everybody. And a lot of it also comes with, do you have the breathing room to walk and chew gum at the same time? Where it might make sense to initially focus here, then to focus in this area, and then to take these things together, 8 and 9. Okay? This is not financial advice, and it couldn't possibly be because everyone's situation is so different, but this is a good way to start thinking about how this works.